right, so I want to introduce you to the digestive system. I'll give you a heads up on what our plan is. This is the last system we are going to work on together before we do our dissecting piece. We're basically going to put a 2-week block where all we do is dissect during class. Because it just doesn't work. Mrs. Ferraro and I have tried a bunch of ways to figure out getting us more time to work, and it's just not going to work. So we'll have I have 2 cats, 2 pregnant cats even. And then we'll have fetal pigs are the other ones that we'll be using. Shh. There's enough for groups of 2. What we'll do is basically do a lottery for the cats. Okay, so if you're looking to do a cat, we'll talk. We'll talk. Because I only have 2 cats, and I have 14 fetal pigs. All right, but let's talk about digestive system. Come back to me. Come back. You could really summarize this entire chapter, well, okay, beside the nutrition part. You could summarize this entire chapter by this one diagram. There is a lot of good information on this one diagram. So this is really what I want to spend our time on today. We probably won't even take the whole class period, even though it's a shortened period, to go through this one diagram piece. Because we're looking at 2 big pieces of the digestive system. One which we call the alimentary canal, which is basically what you think of when you think of the digestive system. The tube that basically starts at your mouth and ends at your anus. That's all one tube, all connected. It is. And we take in yummy stuff and we send out not so yummy stuff, right? Sir? The pancreas in the stomach. It's behind it. Okay. Yep. Right. And then you have these accessory organs, the things that help the alimentary canal do their job. Okay? So let's talk from basically where we begin all the way through. So at the very top, you have your mouth. Duh. What's the point of your mouth? To eat, to enter the food into the alimentary canal, right? So in the mouth, then there's a couple of different organs, and we're going to talk more detail about all of these. But what kind of pieces are in your mouth that help with this chewing piece? Teeth, good. So that's actually breaking down the food, right? Like literally mechanically tearing and ripping them. Saliva. What does the saliva do? Or the salivary glands that produce them, what do they do? Break down the food. In particularly, and again, it says it right here, they initiate the breakdowns of what? The carbohydrates. Now, this whole thing will go better if you remember there's 3 big main food groups, right? Pizza and ice cream. No, sorry. Carbohydrates. Do you know what else? Lipids and, which is fats, and proteins. 3 big main groups. And what you'll see as we go through this is that each of the parts of your alimentary canal are focusing on specific parts of those, or specific of those types to help break them down. So immediately in your mouth, as soon as you start that chewing process, you're breaking down the carbohydrates. You're beginning that process. Okay? There's another organ in your mouth that helps with the tongue, right? The tongue actually helps guide and move and chew. You don't really realize how much your tongue moves around when you chew until you bite it. Ow, ooh, okay. And then every time you try and move it, it hurts, right? Yeah. So, we swallow. What that does is your tongue is moving the food. It's called a bolus, basically that big blob of food that you've chewed up, is moved back into the pharynx. And the pharynx is just this tube in the back, like the back of your head back here, into your throat. And the pharynx has 2 tubes. One is the esophagus, right, which leads down to your stomach. And the other one? The trachea, which leads to your lungs. Okay? And they both use the same input, right? So how do we keep food from going into the lungs instead of into the trachea? The little flaps. Anyone know what it's called? epiglottis, right? So when I go to swallow, that little flap comes back and covers the trachea so that when I swallow, the food goes into my esophagus, not my lungs. Sure. Shh, 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 shh. Sorry? Sure. What do we call that when food goes down there? Choking, right. So your body says, hey, this is wrong tube, wrong tube. And you cough, you sputter, you get that back out. Good. Does anybody know what we call food that gets kind of stuck in your lungs and you get sick from it? It's called an aspiration pneumonia. Aspirating means you've actually breathed in some liquid or some fluid into your lungs, and it sets up an infection. Like, your body doesn't like that, obviously, right? Happens much more frequently with people who are very sick, some folks who've had strokes, your elderly folks. You have to be very careful about this. Not that I'm aware of. That's a good question. Yeah. So that esophagus is made out of smooth muscle, and it basically squeezes. It starts at the top, squeeze, 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 to move that bolus of food down into your stomach. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Hiccups are a tough thing. I don't really know the correct answer. I'm not sure that anybody really knows why we get them. It's a spasm of your diaphragm. What causes that? Something. It's a autonomic nervous reflex. But why does it come because of that? I don't know. Yeah. Sir?
How long does it take for the food to get to your stomach?
Not long. Yeah. Less than a minute to make that journey here. Yeah, no. 10 seconds maybe. Yeah, it's fairly rapid. Okay, let's keep going. I got to make sure my timing is right here. Yes, 40. Thank you. Okay, in your stomach. So what happens in your stomach now? Digestion, certainly. Shh. There are acids, stomach acid. We'll talk in detail about all the pieces that make up that stomach acid. There's also enzymes, right? Catalysts. That's a biological catalyst that help these reactions, these decomposition reactions, to happen faster. In particular, in your stomach, they begin the digestion of, what does it say? I'm assuming you have the same thing up there that I do. Proteins, right? These enzymes start breaking down the proteins. So carbohydrates started when you first started chewing. Proteins now beginning in your stomach area. There's a little valve on the bottom of the stomach that then opens once it's got some nice mixing and some good digestion processes beginning after maybe an hour or so. And that bolus, that food, moves down into the small intestine. You got it. And there are different pieces of that intestine that have different names. We'll talk about those. What's the main role of that small intestine? Does anybody know? Nutrients. We want to actually absorb the nutrients in that small intestine. That's why there's so much of it. It's so long, because we want as much time as possible for that food to absorb. Okay? And we're still breaking down as well. We're continuing to break down the fats, we're breaking down the proteins, breaking down the carbohydrates. But the small intestines are all about absorption. I did the math, because I was reading this chapter on Friday, this little piece about the small intestines. It talked about surface area for the intestines. I should have looked up this number here. Where was that number? It's like 18 meters square, like 18 square meters. If I'm not mistaken, the whole, not the length, it's the area of it. It was talking about the absorptive area. And so I did the math. Basically, your intestines, the surface area, like if you took it all and laid it out all flat, would be as wide as 4 football fields and as long as 2. I am. The area, the surface area, the places where you can actually absorb nutrients. It's pretty cool. All in this like 30-foot little tube. So we'll talk how that is. It has all these little microvilli, if you remember this word way back from our... Yes, that gives us more surface area. We'll talk more about that. It then goes into the large intestine. And what is our large intestine mainly focused with? Absorbing water. Okay, and of course all of the electrolytes, the protein, the potassium, the sodiums, all these kind of things, right? So small intestines focuses on the nutrients, right? Getting the good stuff from the food, leaving the bad stuff in the intestine. The large intestine is what focuses on getting that water, because remember, water is like the most precious thing our body has. So we want to make sure if we've got plenty of it, yeah, well then we don't worry too much about it. But if you're low on water, okay, let's absorb as much as we can out, and you get this very hard, compact feces, right? And then you have the rectum, which is just the straight end. Rectus means straight. Remember the rectus abdominis and the rectus femoris? This is Latin for straight. So this is the straight bottom part of the large intestine. And then the anus is the end point, exit out. We have these different accessory organs around the intestines that help. So the liver produces what? Bile. And its main job is to break down fats. Don't get that emulsify word makes you think it's all, no, it just breaks down. Okay, breaking down fats. So again, carbohydrates for where? In the mouth. We started there, right? And the stomach, of course, and intestines. Where'd the protein start? In the stomach. But fats are a little more harder to digest, so we need this extra bile fluid that's secreted there into the small intestines that help break up those fat molecules and allow us to use them. We'll talk more about that. It's because of the liver almost acts like a filter for that breaking down of those alcohols, and it takes time in order to do that. If you put too much in, it just kind of overwhelms it, and you get that alcohol in your blood, which again gives you those blood alcohol readings that are bad, and you start behaving strangely. Yeah, we'll talk more about that.
So, like, junk food basically has, like, so much more fat and nutrients, so, like, that's why, like, it's worth more instead of, like, nutrients that you don't get.
Sure, right. Yeah. You know, in my little candy bar that I eat, there's... Do y'all ever do these workouts where you see the amount of calories you burn? Like, I'll spend half an hour working really hard on the elliptical, and I'll burn 190 calories. Yeah, your Snickers was 350 or 400 calories. You know what I mean? So I did a lot of good hard work, but I still didn't even do half a Snickers. You know what I mean? So these are we call them nutrient dense, not nutrient dense, caloric dense foods where, man, lots of calories in a small little package. Very tasty, though. Very tasty.
So if the liver breaks down the fat, does the protein and carbohydrates just kind of skip the liver process?
So they don't go through the liver. The liver actually secretes bile into the small intestine, and that's what actually does the breaking down of those fats. I don't think the bile has a significant effect on them, no, because the other enzymes and bacteria that are present in the small intestine will help continue to break those down. Good question, though. Plus, you still have all of the digestive acids from the stomach that has moved into the small intestine as it comes out. Again, we'll talk much more about these. Yes, sir? I'm sorry? A calorie is a measure of an amount of energy that you can get from a certain amount of food. It can be how much work you do. You can measure calories by how much work you do. You can measure it by how much is in the food that allows you to do stuff. I think the technical definition is allowing you to change the temperature of 1 kilogram of something by 1 degree Kelvin. It's not bad. It's just that we only need a certain number of them. And when we eat way more than that, our body just stores it because we don't need it. Yes, exactly. Our gallbladder is another accessory organ. Our gallbladder is basically like a little storage sack for the bile. You'll notice it on our cats and on our pigs. It's this very greenish color. It's very obvious when you have the gallbladder from the bile. Does everybody know anybody who has had their gallbladder removed or taken out? Yeah. Yeah, okay, yeah, sure. And then the pancreas. We talked a bit about pancreas secreting the hormones, right? Dealing with the sugars. But the pancreas also secretes pancreatic juice, which again goes into that small intestine and helps with the breakdown of that food. So there you go. one diagram that I think is a very solid introduction to this digestive system. Friday, I am still looking for your questions. That works very nicely to put them up onto Schoology. So let's just do that Friday from the chapter. Yeah, no worries. Do Friday. Yes, do Friday. So I would begin that process. Those of you who have not taken, those of you who have taken the assessment, we'll spend some time doing that tomorrow. Okay? We've got about 10 minutes. I'm going to give you the opportunity